JIMI WANJIGI is here in the studio with us today. It's been a while since you've been here, but we're glad to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Presidential aspirant as well as businessman. Today we're looking at the business side of things, economy-wise, and looking at the true state of what Kenyans are going through today, what the country is going through today. So we're glad to have you with us today. Our guest host is Manuel Magoma, and he's with us today as well to look into these issues. You know, like to jump into things. And, you know, obviously there's a reason why you're having this conversation with us today. Broadly, before we get granular, what is the state of the economy for Kenyans and Kenya today?
Good morning, all, and thank you for this invitation. It's good to be here again. Let me be very clear. I believe that this election is premised on the economy, the current state and economic state of every Kenyan life is at stake here. That is where we are. More and more Kenyans are poorer. We have never had the record of poverty that we're experiencing today. The regime of Moi left with a poverty rate of 54%. The regime of Mwai Kibaki left with a poverty rate of 38%. 38 of 100 Kenyans unable to find food every day. According to the KIPRE figures that came out just before budget this year, the poverty rate in Kenya is 63%. 63 of 100 Kenyans cannot find 300 shillings to feed themselves every day. That is a state of an economy, because food is life. Without food, you have no life. Now, in view of that, we decided, in fact, I decided, that we must address the issue that is plaguing us. And we found that the biggest issue that is plaguing this nation is debt. Humongous amounts of debt. The government has admitted that 65% of its revenue is going towards debt. 65% of the taxes we raise goes towards debt. So any serious contender for the seat is just like a company, a corporate company. If you're about to take over a corporate company, you look at the books. So a few months ago, in fact late last year, we decided to interrogate the debt book. What exactly has been happening over the last few years? And I can tell you it was astonishing. We got a very good forensic investigator who had worked with government for about 40 years and a team of 3 people. And over the months, they went through government books. And the government books on the economy are very clear. The Constitution anchors the budget as the primary source of all approvals of government revenue, expenditure, loans, everything. It's very clear, Article 206, that that is where it is anchored. Government cannot operate outside that. The budget is 2 books that are presented to Parliament. They are called appropriations. Appropriations development is 1 book. Appropriations recurrent is the other. In appropriations development, that book is what covers loans, because the Constitution and the Public Finance Management Act is very clear about our loans. We can only borrow for development. So it is anchored in the development appropriations. The recurrent is where repayments of debt are, where wages of government salaries are, and where OPEX operations are. These are the 2 books that are passed by Parliament. WANJIGI in public participation participates in. Thereafter, they get presidential assent and presidential warrants to activate the movement of money. Now, so we interrogated the appropriations development book. Now, this book is so clear. It lists the projects that the government intends to do that financial year. It lists its sources of revenue, tax and debt. So we interrogated the last 8 years of the Jubilee regime. And in the last 8 years of the Jubilee regime, the project estimates, costs of all the projects that they sought to do, came to a total of 5.3 trillion, of which they got approval to remove 3.3 trillion from taxes and to borrow 2 trillion. That is the appropriation bill development that has been passed over the last 8 years. So the loans approved that WANJIGI knows, that Parliament knows, is 2 trillion. Because loans are only anchored in the appropriations development and approved there, nowhere else. And all those loans of 2 trillion are external loans. What happens in the schedules of the appropriations, it shows the projects. So it tells you, for example, Ministry of Water is building a very big dam in Kitui, for example, for 1 billion shillings. Okay? 500 million is coming from taxation, 500 million is coming from a loan. That 500 million coming from a loan goes to a further schedule. It shows government of Japan is giving us a loan, or government of India is giving us a loan, or Exim America is giving us a loan. So it goes, when they come there for external borrowing, it is already locked in. So 2 trillion is what is approved over the last 8 years as debt to be taken. That is what WANJIGI participated in, that's what Parliament participated in, and that is what the President signed warrants for. Assented to, because it becomes law, an act, and assented to, and on top of that gave a warrant. Now,
So Jimmy,
yes,
I hear you saying, maybe not having said it out loud, but I hear you saying that there's some 3-point-something trillion shillings that has gone towards debt, that is debt, that the country essentially does not know about.
let me explain. That is what we approved for debt taking. Now, you then go to where do you find the current outstanding of debt? You go to Central Bank. Central Bank is the holder of what you call the exchequer account, consolidated fund and the exchequer account of government. Just like your bank, it gives you a statement every month of your state of affairs. So all Central Bank does is report the state of your account every single month. So over the last 8 years, the debt book is showing us an outstanding in April 2022 of 8.4 trillion. 8.4 trillion. That is what it is saying is the debt of the country. When we analyzed it further, we found that in that there is the debt of Mwai Kibaki that ended in June 2014. So you remove Mwai Kibaki's debt of 2.3 trillion. You have a total that has been taken over the period of 8 years by this regime of 6.1 trillion. 6.1 trillion against approvals of 2 trillion. So they have taken 4.1 trillion shillings
Without the approval.
without the approval of WANJIGI, without the approval of Mora, without the approval of Parliament, without a law.
And this can be proven because of the schedule that you've spoken of, for which borrowing then must be scheduled, and then it must have been basically shown across board. Point one.
Yes, to a project.
Right.
To a project. So 4.1 trillion cannot be tied to any project that the government said it wanted to do, because that is all put in Parliament.
And this money has come in to the country?
Now, that's the big question. You, as I told you, in the budget you have 2 books
Yes.
that are passed as acts. You have appropriations development and you have appropriation recurrent. I'm now about to give you another figure. In the appropriations recurrent, you have what are called repayments of debt. Debt repayments that are passed every financial year. And in the last 8 years, our forensic investigation is clear. It shows that we have repaid debt to the tune of 5.6 trillion. 5.6 trillion. Am I baffling you with figures?
No.
Me,
I'm understanding.
I
what
guess
you're
it.
saying.
I am just sitting quietly getting confused, but this is okay.
What he's trying
fine.
to say is that
Yes.
the total debt that ideally we should be outstanding is 2.8 trillion. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying the total, yes.
Ideally, it should be 2.8 trillion.
No, I'm not.
5.4
I'm not.
trillion minus 8 point something trillion, about 2.8 trillion.
No, I'm disagreeing with you. I'm completely disagreeing with your figures. I am saying that what we have legally passed as debt is 2 trillion.
Yes, that we got to clear.
The rest of the money is being called debt, but it's not debt because
Yes,
there's no project attached.
What we inherited from the regime of Mwai Kibaki
It's
is
2.4.
2.3, 2.4,
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So that is 4.4.
yes.
We have in turn paid 5.6,
So therefore, there should be a surplus.
a surplus of 1.245 trillion.
That surplus
That
is
is
based
the true
on
account,
appropriations.
legally. Yes, because you cannot borrow anywhere else. The Constitution, Public Finance Management Act is very clear. All borrowings are for development. All borrowings are anchored in the appropriations development. There's no other place to borrow.
Are you
And
saying,
all the appropriations are created as one law.
Are you saying that our members of parliament in the last two parliaments have been sleeping on their jobs
Yes.
and not able to hold the government to account?
Absolutely, because what has been happening, you are passing an appropriations development of 2 trillion loans. And at the same time, you're passing recurrent appropriations of 5.6 trillion to be paid to 2 trillion loans. It doesn't make sense. Why are you overpaying, right? Money you have approved for loans. But not only Parliament, because this is only kicked off when the President signs them into law and signs the warrants.
But the president only sends them into law after they've gone through the parliamentary process. Budget has been discussed in parliament.
Budget is
bill has been
created.
prepared.
Budget is created by government.
Yes.
So the ministries put forward their requirements to the Treasury. The Treasury creates the appropriation bill. That appropriation bill comes to WANJIGI. From WANJIGI goes to Parliament. So government creates it. They are also responsible. They are all responsible. The whole chain is responsible. And what I'm trying to tell Kenyans is that we have no debt. We actually have a surplus.
Okay.
Yet, this is the biggest bone of our lives. Our taxes are high because of this. Development has stalled because of this. All this money, literally what I'm saying, is fake.
Okay.
Please, CT.
Yeah. The money that we as citizens have a mandate to pay is money that we have borrowed. Simply put, money that has been approved by Parliament. To
Correct.
help. Okay?
Correct.
Now, if there's any other money that we are told has been borrowed and it didn't go through that process, then that is not money that we should be even discussing.
It is illegal.
Okay. Now, the part where I got lost completely. So, how then is this money borrowed?
Now, this is the big this is the big question.
Yes.
What has happened? What has happened
Yes.
is that there's a crime scene. There's actually a crime scene. Because when you are operating outside of the law, it is a crime scene. Okay? A lot of the borrowings, for example, there is something called domestic borrowing. In the financial statements that the Treasury produces, and even in the statements of Central Bank, when they are showing this debt of 8.4 trillion, they have what are called external and domestic. Domestic debt is listed over the period of the last 8 years as 2.9 trillion.
It is listed
It is listed
in that book that you
in
mentioned.
that book,
Okay.
of which the 2.9, we have repaid 1.8 principal and 2.6
Interest.
interest. That amounts to part of the 5.6. So Domestic debt is normally taken through instruments such as treasury bonds.
And
Okay?
bills.
There is nowhere where domestic bonds or domestic borrowing is anchored in the appropriations. That borrowing has not gone towards any project.
Okay.
So what is it funding?
Okay.
So you're saying that when we borrow, the borrowing is based on what we want to do with it.
Yes,
And this must be documented.
it must be
So
documented.
we know that this money that we are borrowing is intended
For this.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we borrow and you cannot place any project next to it, then the question
It was not a loan.
It was not a loan. It's
Then
not an
that borrowing is
appropriation.
unnecessary.
It's unconstitutional, not unnecessary. It is unconstitutional. It's an operation outside of our laws.
Okay. So, Jimmy, how did you find out all this information? We've had folks from the Institute of Social Accountability here telling us about how they've never been able to have a look at what the debt burden of the country is because the debt schedule that should come from the Treasury has never been made public.
That is not accurate information.
What? They've
Why?
tried. What,
Because
they
it is
say
available.
they've tried.
It is public. No.
What
This
they
is-
have, and
Yes.
we're talking about this year, 2022, sat in that chair where you're sitting and
Yes.
told us that 2018 is the latest information that they have in terms of Kenya's debt burden.
Now let me.
So where
let
is
me
this
be-
coming
let me- because maybe they didn't know where to look.
Ah,
The law is very clear. All appropriations must be published 1 month after being passed by Parliament.
well, you know what?
And
There's what the law says, and then
no,
there's
but it is
reality.
there.
Okay.
Even you can go on the website. Maybe they didn't know where to look.
Okay.
So the appropriations are published. We have analyzed all the years from 2014 right up to 2022.
Okay.
Now, this is the first ever forensic investigation into our debt. And I chose to do it because here I am going for presidency. If you don't understand your books, it's like taking over a company. If you're taking over a company and you don't understand the books, then you don't know what are you taking over. So I chose to do that. But what was most baffling is I did not understand how there was 38% poverty rate in 2014 and you had a debt of 2.3. And there's now a 63% poverty rate and you have a debt of 8.4.
But no, that's
It
that
didn't make
question
sense.
of 68% is a bit also questionable.
63%.
It's questionable because
No,
World
it's a
Bank says,
KIPRA report.
World Bank says
No,
different.
forget about World Bank.
I'm
Let
just
us
saying,
let
World
us
Bank says
deal
different.
let us deal with the figure that we have. No, because let's deal with local fingers. Because what I'm actually saying in this is that, do you know, we don't even need this donor money. So let's be very careful about these sources that you're talking about.
Jimmy,
5.6.
Jimmy, even the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics has figures that differ with your 63%.
Now, this is a report that came out in February from KNBS and from KIPRA before the budget. It is 63%. Those are their figures. Yes,
Let me
that
ask you
is their
this
figures.
question.
So what I'm trying to say, I think let's not lose the point here.
Actually,
Yeah.
I have to
This
stick on
was the
one,
trigger.
Jimmy, for
This
a
was the
simple
trigger.
reason. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. But these issues, I have to understand them so that I can place them correctly. You see, when we talk about people who are poor, is it what we may refer to as multidimensionally, or are they monetarily poor?
The 63% are both. Are both. It's a
Combined?
combination of both.
Yes.
Yes.
Why I ask the question is because when you segregate them and you look at them, then you understand exactly where the problem is. Now, I'm asking the question because you dismiss the World Bank findings. I am given to looking at World Bank figures with a little tilt of the head myself, but they cannot be ignored completely. You know why? The figures that they use are often taken from the figures that we ourselves have produced locally. It's not as though they just come up with something out of thin air. They use what we have locally, and then come up with whatever it is that they have.
Now, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes.
If what we have locally, such as our debt, has not been properly articulated, why are you trusting figures about poverty? Let's be sincere here.
isn't
I am
costing.
just giving you.
It's considering, not costing.
Yes, I am giving you raw facts and figures about the debt figures that have been presented to us
Okay.
by the same authorities.
So, Jimmy, if that is the situation, that what we're being told is that Kenya has been borrowing such and such, and then there's the burden to pay this debt back. And that burden, unfortunately, rests on the shoulders of Kenyans on a daily, because now we're looking at 63%. That any money that comes in or any money that is going to be expended, 63, was it? You said 65% of it
Government
goes
revenue.
towards paying debt.
Yes.
If it's going towards paying debt and there's no debt, what are we saying? According to you, what are we saying?
That it is a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. It is fake. It's fake. It's debt wash. Call it what you want. It does not exist in our books.
So where is this money going?
And the tragedy of this, that's the whole point. This is why I'm saying, first and foremost, that we must stop any payment of debt. If you hear payment of debt, no, it is a fraud. No, it is a fraud. Yes.
Okay. So
No, it is a fraud.
Let's look
And
at,
anybody who passes that is part of that fraud.
we're going to a break in a quick minute, but then should there not be a schedule of repayment as well that then is made public? Because
It is public.
But then who is this money going to?
No.
If you're saying there's no debt and
Yes.
we're repaying debt, who is the debt going to?
That is the big question. What they have done in this schedule, the 5.6 that we have repaid. Remember I told you in the appropriations recurrent, they show all the payments that have been done over the last 8 years. And those payments are 5.6 trillion. I want to make a note here. That over the last 8 years, the projects that were to be funded were 5.3. That was the estimated cost of the projects. We have repaid debt of 5.6, meaning that we could ourselves from our taxes have funded all our development projects. All. And then some. We have even overpaid what they scheduled as an estimated cost of our projects. We could have funded, we didn't need any debt from our taxes. That's the other baffling figure. Now, with that, the 5.6 is shown as where the repayments are. External and local.
It's 29 minutes to 9 o'clock. To 10 o'clock, I beg your pardon. See, even the time has left me. It's 29 minutes to 10 o'clock. JIMI WANJIGI is telling us, and these are things that are in plain sight.
Yes,
the question
they're in plain
is,
sight.
without interrogation of the same, is that it's left out for you to see right in the open.
Yes, it is.
Don't you think that folks would be a little bit more careful then if this money is not going towards the paying of debt?
That
people
is
will
the
start to
investigation.
ask questions as to where this money is going.
Exactly.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
JIMI WANJIGI is spilling it this morning. CT has a question.
Well, actually, the everything that JIMI WANJIGI is saying, he's directing us to specific places where we can look and verify what he's saying, and that we'll do in due course. But I'm a layman, and this information is a little mind-boggling. I mean, it's all coming at me at once, and it's a little difficult to decipher and to place. So, to understand it from the layman's position,
Yes.
I being the layman here, let me ask the question. Just simply, there was this little matter that caused the fall of a CS in Treasury and its principal secretary.
Yes.
The Aurora and Kumarer Dam. It's still in court, but that's not what I'm discussing. I am looking at the matter that has been the public domain and has been published, where supposedly money was borrowed from an Italian bank. Story goes, money never even got to Kenya.
Correct.
There was some supposed insurance company that got the money. There were individuals who were supposed to perform that task, and lo and behold, something even more interesting happened. They folded. So, yeah, the company ceased to exist. And just when I was beginning to understand that they folded, the next thing I knew, we as Kenyans were being sued. I thought, hey, the money never got here and we're being sued. I mean, this one is a little interesting. How does this work?
Something along the same lines happening here?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm asking, because that one really confused me. I would have assumed when we borrow as a country, we should get the money.
Right.
So when I'm paying, I know we got it. But this one didn't. It just didn't.
That's correct, City.
Yes.
That is absolutely correct.
Yes.
You see, what was mischievously done in 2014 was that they amended the Public Finance Management Act, which had been passed in 2012 in line with the Constitution, Section 57. Now, the Constitution in Article 204 is very clear. All monies, 2061, sorry, all monies received, borrowed, expended, everything must go through the consolidated fund, must go through the exchequer account in central bank where the appropriations are operated from. Okay? The Public Finance Management Act that was passed in 2012, Section 57, was in line with that provision in the Constitution, that article. Then mischievously, in 2014, they amended the Public Finance Management Act and unconstitutionally amended it, I want to say, because they created a bypass to the consolidated fund, to the exchequer account, contrary to the Constitution. They added two prefix, C and D, which could pay a supplier direct from a loan, and two could even pay arrangers of financiers and stockbrokers and everybody else, contrary to the Constitution provision that all monies must come into the exchequer account where the appropriations kick in and go for payment, because that is what WANJIGI has approved. Now, they used that mischievously in 2014, and we have a list of items that have been used over the last 8 years and people involved over the last 8 years that are responsible for what we are calling a heist of 9.7 trillion shillings. It is a heist of almost $100 billion. The dams is one of those, but I want to come to that in part 2. Right now, I want to address myself solely to the books that have been presented for us to publish, that are legally presented, for us to scrutinize all these financial years and the statements of accounts at Central Bank, their own books, their own records,
So this is the
and
thing.
ask them why they are giving us false accounting.
But
False accounting, even the Central Bank, as was mentioned here earlier, even the Central Bank.
Jimmy, these things are in plain sight, as
Yes,
you yourself have
you
said.
know-
So why would it? Why?
Nando
would
brought up a
something-
very interesting...
Why would it be in plain sight? If
he
you know
brought
that
up
it will
some
get
very
you
interesting
into
figures.
a problem?
Yes, he brought some very interesting figures. Let us even forget about the appropriation of 2 trillion that is approved. Let us take Central Bank account. Okay? It is showing 8.4 as of April. All right? 8.4. So take it that's legitimate. We have paid 5.6. Because the 8.4 is Kibaki's and this, what has happened over the last Jubilee regime. So 8.4 minus 5.6 payments. You get to 2.8. 2.8. Even Central Bank account should be showing that even if we were to say that's the maximum, that's the debt, that is the maximum debt we should be having. Forget about whether it's legally passed or not.
And yet, what are we being told we owe now?
8.4.
Oh,
And
so,
they are even increased it now to a ceiling of 10 trillion.
Yes.
so we're
10
saying
trillion.
we have
Because
wait.
we are so tight, right?
So we're saying we have a situation where we have this debt, which even when it's paid, it doesn't reduce.
It doesn't reduce.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
No, but don't we also borrow almost every other month? We go and take bonds and bills.
Yeah,
in
but
the
for
local
what?
market.
But for what?
Because you see,
For what?
No, the for what is a different question, and I will come to that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to understand the 8.4 from a layman, as you've said, from a simple layman. Every month or every quarter, we pay a certain amount of money towards debt repayment. Correct? The money that the government pays.
Yes.
Whether it's the Chinese or the Americans or IMF or whoever
Yes.
it is. But also every other month or every other quarter, we also still borrow money. So it means that technically, you see, when we go with your narrative of this 8.4 is not reducing, you're almost saying that our debt we never take any. But last month, or was it this month, Central Bank was in the markets, floating some bonds, trying to borrow from the local market. So it therefore means that the next time they publish, that money that they borrowed from the market will be added onto the 8.4. You get what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's simple logic that if I continue borrowing, that number will continue going up.
Let us be very clear here. Let us be very clear. Let's not be confused. All borrowings are anchored in the law.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
So domestic borrowing, as I said, this is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Accounts for 2.9 trillion of the debt.
Agreed.
It is not anchored in any law.
Okay.
It is not in any appropriation. It is going towards no project. So what is that borrowing for? Are you trying to tell us that the borrowings outside of the law, which are more than the borrowings in the law, we have passed 2 trillion in law to be borrowed, right? These 4 trillion, which you're saying, because it amounts to 4 trillion, borrowings in the domestic market and some external, such as Eurobond, borrowings outside of the law that do go towards no project are legal, are justifiable.
No, that's not my question.
Because when you say they are going on the market, when you say they are going on the market, right? They are going on the market to borrow for what?
Mine is a mathematical
No,
question.
even if it's
not a
mathematical.
legal.
No.
You'll come
Even
to the legal. Mine is a mathematical question because you are saying that the books say 8.4 trillion, which we say, okay, that's central bank book saying 8.4 trillion. So that's understood. And you're saying, but we paid over the years, we paid about 5.6 trillion. So therefore, what we should be having is about 2.8 trillion or thereabout. But the mathematics also tells me, and I'll come to the law later, the mathematics also tells me that if then tomorrow I go and borrow money, whether legally or not, that is still money borrowed. So it will still add to the 8.4.
No, my friend.
No,
My friend.
This is a simple
No.
mathematics. The
It's
legal
not a
part-
question of mathematics. You see, it's like your own company. All right? In order for a company to borrow, it needs board approval.
Yes.
Right?
Not in doubt.
Even in your own home, you ask your wife. You need permission somewhere in order to go and borrow.
Yes.
Right? You don't just go and borrow outside of some structure.
True.
So that borrowing which you're talking about, can you quantify how much it is? Because you say they go on the market. Do you know? You don't know. We have bothered to do a forensic investigation into all of that. Now, the accounts of government must always be based on the appropriation. That is the law. The financial statements, right, are a reporting of what the appropriations show. Right? Now, the financial statements show a borrowing domestic. In other words, that's the statement Treasury produces every quarter. That's the one you're talking about.
Yes.
And it shows that we have borrowed domestically. But it is then not an accurate financial statement because it does not carry the appropriations. The appropriations have no borrowings domestically. All right? All the appropriations over the last 8 years only show external debt approval and borrowings and repayments. Now, if that is the case, then we are being given a fake financial statement. It is fraudulent financial statement. It is what brought down Enron. Okay? So why are you believing? You're hearing things. Why are you believing?
Jimmy, you
so
see-
the point I'm trying to make, right, is that none of these tallies, none tallies
You see,
at all.
Essentially, Jimmy, what we're hearing this morning is a lesson in actually trying to understand government procedures when it comes to how money is borrowed and how it is what is borrowed by the government becomes a public debt. Now, you have presented a scenario here where you're saying, look, there are these documents that you have, there are these processes that you have in government, okay? For something to become a debt, it must follow this particular path.
Correct.
And that is anchored in law.
Right.
Yes.
If it doesn't follow that path,
It's
then
not a debt.
it's not a debt.
Yes.
Even if the money is borrowed, it is not a debt.
Correct.
So the question you should be asking is, who borrowed the money, how did they borrow the money, and where did they take the money?
And then
That's
who
correct,
must answer for it?
Correct.
Yes, now, the other day, we borrowed 28 billion from IMF.
IMF, yes.
And they said it was for budgetary support. Now, budgetary support, is that anchored in law?
Yes.
And it's allowed.
If they can put which budgetary support, which project?
See,
Are
but-
they saying?
Also, it must,
are they? It must go to a
along
project.
with a project.
Yes.
And
Which one?
okay.
Where do you have a shortfall? Is there a debt that you had said was going to be funded by another party for development, and the party did not reneged on its commitment.
Okay, can I give an
You
example?
must explain.
So, Jimmy,
because when they bring, yes.
so
yes.
when we listened to Koyatani read the budget a few months ago, when he said we will be looking to the external market for 1, 2, 3 in order to fund this project. Now, for example, when the 28 billion comes in, what you're saying then is that this 28 billion should point to one of those things where he had said that we will go to the market to look for this money.
Correct.
In the absence of such a note,
Yes.
then this money is not a debt.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Because the law is clear. You can only borrow for development. Now, when he goes to Parliament and he puts the development appropriations down, as I said, there is a schedule of all the funding. It is already there. Kitui Water Project being funded by government of Japan. Yeah? Thika Road being funded by the Chinese Exim Bank. It is there. It is listed. Okay? So he has to show. Normally, by the time he's placing the budget, the external funding is locked in. So if he's getting extra money after that, he should be telling us what was it that was locked in that is now not coming, or is this part of what was locked in? It cannot be outside of the budget.
And so now that it is, or one would say that it was,
Yes,
based
according
on
to
what
the
you are
forensic
telling
investigation, there's been borrowings, so-called borrowings, that
Why?
go to no project, can be assigned to no project at all, and that is the law.
us. Okay.
You know, what I hear is that the law has been broken. We've gone against our own constitution in terms of how we borrow the money.
Yes.
That's for me is that what we are saying?
Absolutely. That's why I called it a crime scene.
Okay.
And what I'm wondering is how it is that these matters passed by, or rather seems to have eluded, committees in Parliament whose job is to investigate these very same things and to ensure that when they give the assent and the approvals for more borrowing, that
Nobody's seen this?
yes,
That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy. And I think you remember my slogan was about Fagia Water because we knew some of these things. Now, the problem we are having is that our politicians don't want us to have a real conversation. A real conversation. And they make everything appear like it's very complicated. You know? Nobody has a public discussion about what we are doing with public financing. It's opaque. You're given slogans and terms that you don't understand, and nobody quite understands the messaging. So what I'm choosing to do is bring the conversation very close to everybody, right to your homes, to say this is really no different to how we budget in our homes, how we run our own personal expenses. And we have anchors in our constitution, anchors in our laws that protect us. Because Wanjiko, the government is us. The government is Wanjiko. So we're bringing the conversation very near. I had a few calls last night from MPs who said, but we've been in Parliament. When did we amend that law? We can't remember doing it. Right? So you wonder, they said, how did we amend a law to say pay suppliers? And it doesn't go to the exchequer account.
How did
they were even in shock how they did it. So we don't know what's going on in Parliament. Maybe they aren't being given enough time to interrogate. I don't want to defend them. I don't want to say they're incompetent. I don't want to say they're part of they're in cahoots. But the basics are that they have taken us and participated in what I'm calling a massive heist of public money.
So then the question
The most
after that is
massive
then,
you have ever imagined.
So then
and
what?
I believe that this is something that is not only going on even in Kenya. I'm sure it is happening in other developing countries.
So then what, Jimmy? Then what?
Well, the first thing here is that we must take a united stand. We are not paying any more debt. We stop. Today, we stop. And anybody who is knocking at the door should show us where it is anchored in law. Where it is anchored in law. Because we have paid 5.6 on projects anchored in law of 5.3. So let them show us where it is anchored in law. If it is not anchored in law, it's what is called an odious debt. Buyer beware. Like now, this domestic borrowing. Where is it anchored to a project? These treasury bonds you're talking about. Where is it anchored to a project? So all those banks who have loaned government without being anchored in law, that's an odious debt. Buyer beware. That's what happens. Buyer beware. Now we must address this because it's a balloon. When you address a balloon, you come back to reality. You pop it. Is what I'm talking here is crisis. Okay? Let's pop the balloon, come back to reality, and deal with it. Because many people are purchasers, for example, of bonds. Right? Treasury
Yes.
bonds.
Yes.
Through banks.
Yes.
And
What
they
we're saying
are-
is that paper is not worth what is written.
No, but Jimmy, those bonds are legal instruments, legal financial
How?
instruments, are they not?
Yes.
I mean, if
They're
the
only
government...
legal financial instruments if they have been passed by parliament as debt. That is the trigger. Not the action
Yes.
of a bond from central bank.
Yes, from what I've observed and from what my limited reading has indicated to me, is that yes, every time the government wants to issue paper, as we call it, the matter goes to Parliament, isn't it?
No, it doesn't. These ones don't go to parliament.
All right, so let me start with the Eurobond. That
Yes.
didn't go through Parliament.
No, it didn't.
Why do I get the impression that it did?
It never went to
I
parliament.
also got the impression I did.
It never went to parliament. It is no appropriation. Any expenditure, any borrowing is in the appropriations. There's no Eurobond in the appropriations. None.
And so you're saying that those who supported this bond, because it was external borrowing, so we were told. all
Yes.
right? Whether it was now, I'm beginning
And
to doubt
by the way, there
everything.
were 3 of them.
Yes, I know there was 1, 2, and 3. So
Yes.
we are saying that even those who participated in this particular process were participating in an odious process.
Correct. And I think you need to ask one other question. Did
Yes.
that money come here?
Okay.
From what you've seen, from what the forensic audit then has then made bare to you,
That's part two.
that's part 2. So we have to wait for the
Yes,
next
but-
episode. But really, are we seeing evidence of
No,
the
no, no.
same
The
in any
question
way?
that he's raising was raised in the time when the 2 gentlemen who were in the Ministry of Finance were
Yes,
there.
yes.
These
Yes.
questions were raised. They were never adequately answered.
At that time.
Thank you very much.
There were questions that kept being asked.
And remember,
Did
there
this
was an
money-
audit by UCO
Yes.
that was never completed.
Yes.
Yes.
And those questions still remain. But Jimmy, allow me to digress a little bit. And sometimes when we come to the show, we've got to ask those hard questions that sometimes people out there cannot be able to ask rather. You've taken this path of questioning a lot of this, and it's a good path. Because I think Kenyans need answers to these questions. But can somebody then sit back and say, are you doing this because you've fallen out with the 2 gentlemen or the 3 gentlemen who are presumably at the top, and therefore because you're not sitting on the same table, then say, acha nifagie yote?
No. I think I've been very clear. I said that I have a quest for presidency. And in your quest for presidency, one must do their homework.
Agreed.
And your homework is the economy, number 1, and other things. We can talk about even our ethics. We've done a lot of work about even why a Kenyan cannot be fully described as a personality. So we have done a lot of homework in this. When we came to the economy, the most frightening aspect was that if you are accommodating or rather receiving a book that is saying 65% of your revenue is going to debt, how do you not interrogate what it was? What it's about? That's what we chose to do. Spent a lot of money in this forensic investigation. And I think I should actually be lauded for exposing this to Kenyans because I've done what has never been done. This is the first ever investigation into government books on the debt. That is 1. Number 2, what is most frightening is that more people are poor and we've taken more debt.
Right.
That is supposed to help us. That is an alarm bell, a red flag for anybody.
So essentially you're saying this debt ought to have reduced this poverty.
Poverty. And
But
yet
we're
it has
taking more
increased
money
it.
and people are getting poorer.
Yes.
So how do you
Yes.
explain this?
How do you explain it? It doesn't make sense. So
So-
it's not personal. It's not personal. Anybody any right-thinking Kenyan would do it. I'm a patriotic citizen. Why wouldn't I do it? If I have capacity, why not? And I've chosen to do it.
If you were not running for presidency, would you have done it?
Yes, because I've been complaining about this a long time. In fact, the first Eurobond, we were the whistleblowers.
Yes.
Jacob Juma came to me, and we initiated the whistleblowing. So we would have done it. What I didn't understand at the time, thought it was just a single action. Now I understand it was the beginning. It was just the beginning. It was a foundation of things that were to come.
Or to come in the future. I mean, it's a lot, and a clock is winding down, but it's a lot to take in and to say, is this really what is happening? When then it comes to shillings and cents in this country,
Actually,
and what is
I
it
need
going to take to make sure that Kenyans are then being removed
No,
from this
I
burden?
think I need to do my homework and get what we refer to as a second opinion, and then we'll ask Jimmy to come back.
I agree, and I think I skimmed through the two presentations that you had yesterday, both the PDF and the PowerPoint that you had yesterday.
Yes.
And reading it in isolation, because it was sent out yesterday late in the evening or something of this.
That's
Reading in
correct.
isolation, it becomes difficult to follow it, because you see, this has to be looked at together with also those who are supposedly being accused, and ask them, come on, help us understand this, because you see, they say sometimes a coin has got two sides, and you've got to understand both sides for us to be able to reach
Actually,
our own
a
logical
coin has
conclusion.
3 sides. my brother.
Final words from you, Jimmy, in about
Yes,
30 seconds.
let me say this. I
Yeah.
would love to come back to have a discussion with anybody who wants to give another view of
Actually,
what I
better
have put
still,
forward.
we would
But I
like
can-
it to open it to our audience so that people can actually ask the questions
Yes.
and go beyond the questions that we may ask.
Yes.
And hopefully also bring in an expert in these matters, and so that we can even
but
have more
I would
dialogue.
like to assure the audience
Yes.
that this is a very professional investigation, forensic investigation into public books,
Okay.
and it's the first ever.
Jimmy?
And I would like to advise Kenyans the following. We are now going to an election, and we must be very clear that you demand from anybody that you're trying to elect that they will not pay debt.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Jimmy. We'll be glad to have you in the future.